At Experian.co.uk, we know being single's no fun. That's why we do everything we can to help you meet your ideal match, your data self.
Until I met my data self, I had no idea which credit card was right for me. He was able to show me the ones I was eligible for before I even applied. It really has changed my life.
Find out how your data self could help you make better financial decisions at Experian.co.uk. Experian Limited is a credit broker, not a lender, working with selected lenders.
Welcome to the Brief History Podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Knight. Producing, editing and composing of the music is done by Harry Edmondson. Thank you for everybody who's taken their time out and reach out to us on social media. They've left reviews. Any feedback is more than welcome. We are trying to go in a new direction and take all your feedback and turn it into the best podcast we can. So please keep it going. Anybody who hasn't done so, please get in contact. We're on Be History Podcast for both Twitter, Facebook, same for Instagram and Snapchat too. So find us on there and please follow, like, share, subscribe. You know what to do, guys. As you'll notice, last week we had an announcement. We did cover the Korea War, the episode before. As per the announcement, there is a new direction we want to go in. We want to make it a bit more analytical, more opinions with just the history we've done so far. So hopefully you like the new direction we're going. Once again, please let me know how you feel about it, and we can tweak and make changes if need be, but we can't if you don't let us know what you want us to do. So please reach out to us and get in contact. As always, enjoy this episode. If you haven't already subscribed to the podcast, please do. That way you get notified, or even like my podcast app that I use, that will download the episode automatically, so you don't have to do anything further or go searching for us. Please leave a 5-star review. It takes seconds. Rate it as well, and that really helps us moving forward, so your help is very much appreciated. Enjoy the episode. This is the Brief History Podcast, and I'm your host, Andrew Knight. Today's episode is on the Israeli-Palestine conflict. We will go through a brief history of it, and then we'll dive into some of the meaty topics today. The Israelis and Arabs have been fighting over a specific part of the country for many years now, which is Gaza. On and off for decades. It has been part of a wider Arab-Israeli conflict. Essentially, after World War II and the Holocaust, 6 million Jewish people were killed, and the Jewish people wanted their own country. They were given large parts of Palestine by the UN, which was the traditional home of the Arabs, though when we say Arabs, not to forget that they weren't all Muslim. Large parts of Christians, Jewish, and other religions made up part of the Arabs who lived there. The neighbouring countries and the Arab people itself within the region thought it was unfair and didn't want to accept the new country. In 1948, the two sides went to war. When the war finished, Gaza was controlled by Egypt, and another area you'll hear a lot of, which is called the West Bank, which is by Jordan. This area contained thousands of Palestinians that had fled what is the new Jewish home of Israel. Furthermore, another war was started in 1967, which the Israeli forces controlled Palestine areas, and the Israeli troops stayed there for many years. The Israelis hoped they might exchange the land they had won from the Arab countries and ultimately get recognition for Israel's right to exist and end the war. Israel and its troops left Gaza in 2005, but a terrorist group called Hamas won elections and took control. Now, this is a point of contention. Hamas, as they were elected as part of the Palestinian ruling government, at that point, had they cut ties with the Hamas, the terrorist organization, or not? We'll discuss that further, but you'll hear Hamas, the terrorist group, and Hamas, the government of Palestine too. What may happen in the future, we're unsure, but certainly Hamas and the Arabs refuse to recognize Israel as a country, and they want the Palestinian people to return to their hometowns. Hamas as a terrorist organization, and in some cases Hamas as the government had used violence and is using violence to achieve these aims. Since then, Gaza has been under blockade by the Israeli government and the IDF, which is the Israeli Defense Force. It controls the borders and limits who goes in and out of the country. 1.5 million Palestinians live within the Gaza Strip, and it is incredibly difficult. Israel controls the coastline, so they've got entry and exit crosses into Israel. There is another crossing point into Egypt, though as of yet there's no working airport. Because of these vast restrictions, not many goods can get in or out of Gaza. Israel controls the flow. They control the flow of food in aid agencies try, but they say families are not eating as much breads and fresh vegetables as they used to, as the Israeli government are actively controlling what goes in and out. There is also major problems within power, so electricity, again, controlled by the Israeli government, and there are lots of power cuts. Unemployment is an issue within the Gaza Strip. One of the main reasons because of this is the products coming in and out. So you don't have the same freedoms that we do over in the West in terms of what can be sold and what actually the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip can afford to buy. There are a number of Palestinian refugees. During the 1948 and 1968 wars, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians left or were forced out of their homes, and they moved to neighbouring countries and became refugees. Up to 4.6 million Palestinian refugees and their descendants are living in camps within the West Bank, within the Gaza Strip, in neighbouring countries, Syria, Jordan and the Lebanon. They do get aid and support from the United Nations as the result too. The Palestinians don't have an active army. Rockets are fired regularly into Gaza and into Israel as well. The border towns are used to take shelter from the Israelis, and they adopt their lives accordingly to these rocket attacks. There has been a number of Israeli offences since the troops left in 2005. The IDF, or the Israeli Defense Force, main aim is to stop the rocket fire from the Palestinians into Israel. Three of the major conflicts regarding these rocket attacks were in 2008. The Israelis sent soldiers into Gaza. An estimated 1,300 people, many of them civilians, were killed in Gaza before a ceasefire was declared, with just the loss of 13 Israeli soldiers. In 2012, at least 167 Palestinians and 6 Israelis were killed during an operation by the Israelis after an 8-day ceasefire was declared. Both sides promised to stop the attacks. And more recently, in 2014, 2,200 people were killed, most of them Palestinians and civilians. Many more were injured during 50 days of violence. A ceasefire was agreed by Israel and Hamas, Hamas being the Palestinian controlling government, on the 26th of August. The peace process has been rocky, to say the least. America has worked tirelessly to help settle the fighting between Arabs and Israel, but nothing has worked. Many other countries within the UN also has tried to broker peace. Many people want Gaza and the West Bank to be turned into a new country, Palestine. Israel won't agree to this, as it doesn't feel safe, and they want Israel to be accepted by the Hamas government as a right to exist. At the moment, they don't. Another point that is stopping this is the Israelis who settled in the West Bank, and what will happen to the Palestinian refugees also. It's also important to note that for centuries there was no such conflict. Within the 19th century, the land of Palestine was inhabited by a multicultural population, so around 86% were Muslim, 10% Christian and 4% Jewish. Now, another contentious point is the word Zionism. So in the late 1800s, a group in Europe decided to colonize this land. They were known as Zionisms. They represented an extremist minority of the Jewish population. They wanted to create a Jewish homeland, and they considered locations in both Africa and Americas before settling on Palestine. So as the Zionists started to move into Palestine, or what we know as Palestine now, the immigration created no problems to start off with. However, as more and more Zionists immigrated to Palestine, many of them expressed a wish of taking the land for a Jewish state. The indigenous population became increasingly alarmed due to the numbers and the power grab, if you like. Fighting did break out and escalated into violence. With Hitler's rise to power within the Second World War, combined with Zionist activities to sabotage efforts to place Jewish refugees in Western countries, led to increased Jewish immigration to Palestine, and the conflict grew. Now, after the Second War, the UN partition plan, this happened in 1947 when the UN the United Nations decided to intervene. Rather than adhering to the principle of self-determination of the peoples, in which the peoples themselves create their own state and system of government, the UN chose to revert to the medieval strategy whereby an outside power divides up other people's land. So, under the pressure from Zionists and the wider Jewish population, so we're not saying it's just the Zionists, the extreme group, there were a large number of Jewish people, in no way would be called radical, that called for their own people's land also. The UN recommended giving away 55% of Palestine to the Jewish state. The contentious point here is, at the time, only 30% of the population were Jewish, not 55%. So the Palestinian people thought this was disproportionate, and only 7% of the land were owned by the Jewish people. In 1947 to 1949, war broke out. So the war eventually broke out, including 5 Arab armies. Even though the Arabs had 5 combined armies, it's important to know that the Zionists in Jewish forces outnumbered the Arabs and Palestinian combatants combined more often than not 2 to 3. Though the Arab armies did not invade Israel, all battles were fought on line between the Palestinian state. Now, it's important also that Arab claims that the Arab armies only entered into the conflict after the Israeli forces committed 16 massacres, including the grisly massacre of 100 men, women and children at Deir Yassin. again, this